right, everybody, welcome back to another episode of the Fearcast. This is the podcast dedicated to OCD and anxiety spectrum disorders, and getting your life back. I'm your host, Kevin Foss, and I'm a licensed therapist specializing in OCD and anxiety disorders. And thank you all so much for joining me for this question and answer based podcast. If you have a question that you would like me to answer on a future episode, you can go over to fearcastpodcast.com and click on the submit a question link and send me that question over there. You can also find me over at Instagram. I am not posting as much as I should, and I know I should, but I am doing other things. But check me out over there. You can also send me a voicemail over there, which goes to the top of the list. We haven't gotten a whole lot of audio questions in a while, so we're having to go to the archives and go to text, which is fine, and that's what we're doing. But if you want your question to go to the tippity top of the list, you can go over to Instagram and send me an audio question over there by sending me a DM. I am Fearcast Podcast over there. Today's question is going to come from Abby, and Abby sent me a message over at Instagram. So, questions still come over there. So I'm excited to answer that one. We'll be getting into that one a little bit. It starts off sounding like a little bit of harm OCD, and then it kind of takes a little bit of twist. So buckle up and get ready for that. But let's see here. Before I jump off, we're going to be doing, I'm going to be at the OCD conference. I hope y'all are going to be there too. If you see me there, wave hi. If you don't see me there, well, do your thing, have fun. If you don't go, that's also fine. There's a lot of other things to do other than go to Chicago or spend a bunch of money and spend a bunch of time on the interwebs staring at your computer box. There's a lot of things to do. But if you do see me there, wave hi. Again, or don't. You're all adults. All right. So looking forward to that. As I mentioned last week as well, actually, what would be the point of that? Point of that is there's good information to be had out there, y'all. If you are looking for information, if you're looking to learn more about OCD and anxiety treatment, if you're a clinician looking for more detailed information, if you're an individual, if you're a family member who's looking for more information on OCD and anxiety treatment, go check out the IOCDF. We're going to have a ton of information from, beginner level stuff all the way up to the most advanced stuff you can possibly imagine, and beyond into, theoretical stuff. And so they've got a lot of information. It's a good place to go if you're just getting started. Again, that's the whole purpose of the podcast here, is to get good information as best I possibly can out to folks who need it. And to that end, thank you all so much for letting me be a part of your recovery process. Let's jump into. So I was before I get into the question, I was thinking, I was talking with a client earlier today, and we realized there's a lot to be learned about OCD from hangovers. Now, hear me out. For those of you who don't know what a hangover is like that bad feeling you get the day after, sometimes the 2 days or 3 days after you had more alcohol than you should have had. Now, I don't have a ton of experience. I don't have really any experience with any other substances, but I have had a hangover. I will admit it. For those of you who have but don't want to admit it, I'm going to chew. But Here's what we can learn from them. Well, as one of the things we've been talking about, and one of the things we're going to forever talk about in anxiety land, is like, how do you deal with the obsession? How do you deal with the anxiety? How do you get rid of the anxiety? What do you do about the discomfort that comes up, the uncertainty that comes up? What do you say? How do you address it right so that you don't have to have that pain anymore? And that's the $1 million question, right? Every person who asks a question on this podcast ultimately wants to know, how do I get better from all of this? And there are a lot of different nuances and things like that are important. Obviously, they're important. But one of the things that we were talking about was this reality that we already in life deal with a bunch of stuff that is uncomfortable, that we don't want, that kind of sucks. But we do it. We do it anyways. And for some things, we happily do it. Like, I give the example of, traffic. Traffic sucks. If you're in Southern California or other places and driving, traffic sucks. But we accept it as a reality of whatever that thing is. Wherever you live, there's probably something about that area that stinks. And yet you continue to live there. You make the choice to stay there because you've understood that there's this balance between living where you're at and having all the good from that, and then recognizing that there's that little bit that kind of sucks. Right? Southern California has that. Disneyland has that. I've talked about that. The problem with Disneyland is pretty much everything. There's a lot to hate about Disneyland, and yet I go, and yet I spend money and go and wait in lines and deal with people, and it sucks. So why did I start this by talking about hangovers? Well, so one thing that we know about discomfort is that it will always end. It will always end, as evidenced by the fact that it comes back, right? So with a hangover, when you wake up, you feel like garbage. You know you do. You know you do. And we also know that it's going to end, right? It may be by noon. It may be by later that day. It may be by like 10 a.m. if you're one of those lucky people. It may be like a couple of days you feel off, right? But we know it's eventually going to end, right? So what we can learn from that is that this is we don't ask, why did this happen? Like, where did it come from? We know very well where it came from. We know very well where it came from. We know that it was there. We know it was going to happen. If we pretended like we didn't, we're lying to ourselves. But we know it's going to be there, and it's there, and it's uncomfortable. And we kind of sign up for that. But what do? We manage it. We get through it. We work our day to try to get through it as best we possibly can. Now, the best advice is not to keep drinking then to deal with it for a whole host of reasons, but it's just going to elongate the process, right? There are a lot of healthy ways to deal with it, but the reality is we just have to kind of manage it and know that it's eventually going to pass, right? Why this is important is to know that when anxiety is there, when you get a spike in your thought, and you get that uncomfortable feeling, there's the temptation to jump into compulsive behavior. The compulsive behavior, ultimately, there's not a whole lot you're ever going to be able to do that's really, for the long term, going to eliminate that feeling. Sometimes it works where that feeling tends to go away, but it's eventually going to come back. Your brain goes, well, yeah, but this, well, yeah, but that, right? Or a whole new thing shows up. Instead, what we want to try to do is to wean off of that compulsive process. And that might be through avoidance or through rumination or through reassurance seeking or other mental compulsions. And instead, shift back to just the present and saying, this is uncomfortable and this kind of sucks. And I feel uncertain. I feel afraid. I feel disconnected and unmoored. And we have to feel that way for a period of time where the anxiety comes up and all that anxiety, call it the unwanted feeling state, all right? For whatever the feeling is that you're feeling, is the unwanted feeling state is there and it comes up and it sucks and it's there and then it eventually crests and eventually passes and you eventually get back to you again. And we want to be able to get through that as best we can. And the way that we do that is through living our life, focusing on the things that are important to us, disconnecting from things that are unhelpful. So compulsive behavior, other means that may be, again, unhelpful. So we were talking a little bit about that as one of the best ways or one of the ways to consider thinking about this, because the reality is we are all going to feel uncomfortable in life, and we all already feel uncomfortable and face uncomfortable things. So we can already borrow some of the things and the perspectives that we have towards OCD and OCD spikes just to ride that feeling out. And this is similar to when I talk about anxiety drunk. I suppose there's a lot of alcohol-related analogies here, but y'all are adults. Anyways, so some of that also is important and relevant for the conversation I'm going to have today for Abby's question. So why don't I just get right into reading Abby's question, and then I'll get into a little bit of my thoughts about this. So Abby starts by saying, "Hi, I just wanted to start by saying thank you for all that you do. Your podcast has truly been a huge help for me in learning about my OCD and not feeling as alone. I tend to repeat words and phrases in my head compulsively for hours, days, and sometimes even weeks. I typically do it with words until the word feels, quote, just right. For example, I've repeated my boyfriend's name compulsively, but then it turned into a mental thought loop that lasted months. even if I'm not purposefully thinking or trying to repeat the word or phrase, it sort of keeps replaying in my head like a broken record. My problem is now it's combined with my harm OCD. I had a harm OCD flare-up about my new baby niece. The phrase, quote, kill her, kept popping up and repeating involuntarily, which caused me a ton of distress. I'm confused because it's not like I'm doing this compulsively. The phrase is just looping, and I'm not afraid of it anymore because I know it's my OCD. But it puts me in a lot of distress. I know the more I push it away, the stronger it will come back. And I don't know how to necessarily address this through ERP. Can you tell me why this thought is looping and how I can address this so eventually it goes away? So, Abby, thank you so much for that question. And I hear what you're saying in that word, like, it's like, why is this thought there? You say a lot of things in there, and I want to try to address through this. So let's just start with the top of this. I mean, number one, it sounds like you also recognize that you are someone who has a pattern of having intrusive thoughts that show up, and there are these repeated words over and over and over again, right? You say it started in a compulsive manner, right? Started by saying your boyfriend's name compulsively so that it just felt right. Right. So now if you were in my office, I'd be asking, like, what was the purpose of saying it just right? Was it just simply because you felt off or wrong or bad, so you had to do this thing to get back to feeling right and good and okay again? Or was there another magical connection that if you said it just right, he would, love you, or that he would do something, or he would be safe, or something like that? Or again, is it just that it felt right? It felt good again? Right? So there's a lot of reasons why people would engage in some compulsive behavior, but then you said it just kind of shifted into this like thought loop that lasted for months, right? And then you said, you're not purposefully trying to repeat it, just sort of like just shows up, right? All right. So from that, you jump into it combining with harm OCD. And then you said with your new baby niece, the phrase just kill her keeps popping up. And you said it's happening involuntarily, or having involuntarily, which caused a bunch of distress, and which caused a bunch of distress, and then you're confused because you're not doing it compulsively. The phrase is just looping, and I'm not afraid of it anymore. Okay, so at one point, the phrase was there, and it was kind of causing a lot of distress and a lot of worry. And I think there would be a lot of people who would have this looping thought and wonder, to the question at the end, why is this thought there? What does it mean that the phrase kill her is there? What does this mean about me? What does it mean about me and her? What should I do about this? What should I not do about this, right? So there can be all those questions, but you kind of go on to say that, do you understand it's your OCD? And you said it doesn't really bother you anymore because of that, which actually is a really important thing, right? Once you can first recognize that it's happening for a reason, right? Remember we talked about, or I talked at the beginning of this about the hangover, right? When we ask that question, like, why is this here? I mean, we know why it's there. It's all that alcohol, right? Okay. Now, so why is you said why is this thought there? Well, you have OCD. Right? This is one of those things that happen with OCD. I know it's a simplistic answer to it, but OCD is a pattern of unwanted, intrusive thoughts, feelings, images, sensations, or urges that cause distress, resulting in compulsive behavior to try to alleviate that stress, right? Or that distress. So it could be just simply you have the type of brain that's going to have these thoughts pop up. Now, it could very well be you've developed a relationship with these where initially you were doing it, you were doing something in response to that thought, right? That thought might have just shown up, and there might have been this compulsive behavior about it. Attention given to it, trying to avoid it, trying to do some compulsive behaviors, trying to neutralize it in some sort of way, and it's developed kind of similarly with the boyfriend example, where it then turned into this thing, right? You treated this thought that was neutral in this way to show your brain that this was important and worthy of attention, right? So maybe it's that it's now showing up as this, just kind of neutral thought, but it sounds like it's ultimately then, bothersome, annoying, right? You're absolutely right that when you say, the more I push it away, the stronger it will come back. 100% true. Right? This is one of those realities that, everyone goes through, is that when the thought is there, I think the average person would say, well, how do I get rid of this thought? So we try to neutralize it. We try to distract ourselves. We try to do something to try to get rid of it. That's what we call human. But unfortunately, that can start this process. Now, so you say, so you know that it's eventually going to come back, but you don't necessarily know how to address it through ERP. All right, so that's where I really wanted to kind of get in on this, is like how to address this. What is there to do about this that would be helpful? Is ERP going to be the best kind of mode of going about this, and why, right? Now, I'm going to preface all of this with the assumption that the way you're experiencing the phrase "kill her" is indeed intrusive and unwanted, and not compulsive. Okay, so that's kind of a tricky part, right? A good question to ask, and again, you're not here to answer this, is when that thought shows up, are you doing anything about it? Is it truly just this thought is there and it's there? Or is it there and you're trying to suppress it? You're trying to change it into something else. You're trying to give yourself reassurance that you're okay and you're not going to do anything about it. You're not trying to, you're ignoring it, but over here just kind of monitoring it to make sure it's like it's there or not there. How much is it there? Or is it kind of not there? And how does it go away? And is it here more or less than it was 10 minutes ago? Right? Are you still doing things with it? I think there may be a good argument that likely you are doing something with this thought. What that something is, I don't know, but I would encourage you to reflect on what's going on and to see if when this thought shows up, you are indeed doing something with it, or are you doing nothing with it? I mean, other than acknowledging it or knowing that it's there, but are you trying to do something with it to eliminate it? I think that will be an important first start to this. Okay, so I'm going to treat it as just this is a thought that's popping up into your head. So then the next question is like, why is it causing distress, right? What is the distress about, right? Because you say the phrase, you said, I'm not afraid of it anymore because I know it's my OCD, but it puts me in a lot of distress. Why? So there can be a lot of reasons, right? I mean, some things underneath that. So I wonder if there's a fear of like being out of control with it, right? There can be this worry that like you've done your work with it, you know it doesn't mean anything to you, but that thought still shows up, so you can feel out of control. You don't have control of your thoughts, and maybe you're losing your own love and mind. It could be that the thought is there, and it feels like it's now stuck. So now you're going to have the phrase "kill me" with your niece forever. Right? And that may be an uncomfortable aspect of this. It may be that like you're losing control of your thoughts, and therefore it's going to develop into something worse. For some people, it might be, well, I have this thought, I can't control it, it keeps popping up, and maybe I'm developing schizophrenia, maybe I'm developing dementia, maybe I'm having a psychotic break. Like, there's a lot of reasons that you could think of. Now, there's also, I wonder if there's an element of thought-action fusion going on. So thought-action fusion, for those of you who are unaware, is this kind of mental phenomenon where you think that by simply having a thought, it's going to either, one, increase the chances of that thing happening, or two, it feels like because you have the thought, you feel it emotionally and morally like you've done it or you're responsible for it in some fashion, right? Now, thought-action fusion can be broken down into two main categories, but I'll say three, okay? So this kind of moral thought-action fusion, that's that part where we feel guilty, shameful, or afraid, or responsible for having a thought. Now, this can show up, let's say, with harm OCD, right? So for harm OCD, you can have a thought about harming somebody, right? Hurting somebody. And simply because of that thought, we feel guilty, like you've already done it, like you've already harmed that person, or you feel somehow morally responsible to that person or to society or whatever it might be. because you've had that thought. And this really leads into avoidance, but it also leads into confession behaviors. It leads into reassurance-seeking compulsions, other mental compulsions, to try to alleviate that moral sense of guilt, right? You can also have thought-action fusion about yourself and thought-action fusion for others. And what that means is by having this thought for yourself, it's so thought-action fusion self, it's this worry that like by having this thought, you are more likely to do this thing that you don't want to do. Right? So if you have this violent, dangerous thought, if you quote, think about it more and more and more, you're likelier to do it, or you're going to do it because you have that thought. Okay. For others, then it's like if you have a thought about somebody getting into a car accident, the more you think about that, the more you think that it's likely to harm the other person, or it's going to happen to that other person. Okay. Now, why do I go through all that? It's just different ways that your brain different ways that we can identify how our brain is working and the narratives that it's telling us so that we can start to build your hierarchy, and so you can start to look at what exposures will look like. Now, thought-action fusion ultimately doesn't work because if it's, as they say, if it's good for the goose, it's good for the gander. What that means is if it's good for one thing, if it happens for one, it's got to happen for the other, right? So you might be worried in this case that if I have this thought, kill her, well, I'm going to do it, right? There's this magical association and connection to it. Well, it doesn't work the other way. Like if you were to say, Kevin Foss is going to win the lottery, do you think it's going to increase my chances of winning the lottery, or does it only work for bad stuff? So Kevin Foss is going to get into a car accident, or I'm going to the conference. Kevin Foss is going to get into a plane crash, right? And only he's going to die. Everyone else is going to be fine. Only he's going to die. Does it only work for that one, or does it work for the other one too? Kevin Foss is going to win the lottery. Kevin Foss is going to have good health for the rest of his life. I guarantee that one's not going to happen. But you've got to, ultimately, it doesn't work for both. And if it doesn't work for both, then it ultimately doesn't work. So that's one of the ways that we can start to challenge that type of mindset. Okay, so you also said, like, okay, Kevin, how do I address this so it eventually goes away? This kind of sounds compulsive as a question. Here's why. It's that the goal of this shouldn't be the expectation that it goes away, or goes away in the timing that you want it to. We've talked about how everything is going to go away. All these thoughts will eventually go away. The feeling will go away. It might come back. But if the expectation is if I do A, then B means it goes away, right? That would be a compulsive kind of transaction that happens, right? If I knock on wood 3 times, that means that I'm not going to kill my niece. If I, put my hands in my pockets, it means I'm never going to hurt anybody, right? So there's a lot of different, again, think about it as a transactional relationship, right? I do this, then I should expect this. Okay. But instead, what we're trying to do with this isn't to address the content of the obsession, but is instead to tolerate the distress and the uncertainty and the uncomfortability that comes from that thought, right? So we want to have that perspective that, like, what if it never goes away? What if it never goes away? How would you live your life? Right. There's the example of like the man who lost his arm. All right. That guy could spend the rest of his life pissed off, upset, frustrated, and ruminating about how his life is essentially over, right? All the things that he wanted to do, the 2-armed things that he wanted to do, he could never do those things, right? And now he's stuck having to do 1-armed things, and how his life has all these, it's disabled, it's limited, it's without, right? And that can be overwhelming and painful and frustrating if he stays in that mindset. But if the shift is, the reality is you lost your arm, when you can accept that as the reality, then you can say, what am I going to do to make the best 1-armed life that I can possibly have? And it's going to look different than the 2-armed life, but it's going to look like the best one-armed life that you can possibly have. It offers this shift in perspective on what your relationship to this thought or to this reality is going to be. So the expectation isn't, I can finally live life once this thought is gone. It's to say, I'm going to live life whether or not this thought is here. And that's the important distinction in that. And it's an important distinction for all manner of obsessions. I talk to a lot of folks. I don't want to date until I get a handle on this OCD. I don't want to go on this trip until I figure out my obsessions. It means you're never going to date and you're never going to go on that trip because there's never a done point. There will always be these times when anxiety or doubt or discomfort or rumination or triggers will happen. It's one of the realities of it. So instead, we say, all right, this thing is here. How do I make the best life that I possibly can? All right. So one of the things that we talked about earlier was like, or you wanted to know, like, well, how can you address this through ERP? So I have some thoughts, but I think one of the most important things to consider is pulling back on compulsive behaviors. What are the compulsions that you are doing? Is it ruminating? Is it checking? Is it kind of monitoring it? Is it rumination? Is it like compulsive distraction, which is another thing that can certainly happen? There's a lot of stuff that I would encourage you to be aware of. But I also want you to start thinking about, like, with exposures, why I ask, like, what's the feared story? We need to have something to be exposed to. It's generally not that thing itself, it's the story around it. It's the feeling related to it. And that helps to guide what the exposures are going to be, because otherwise we're just doing stuff, right? I've heard, I don't know if they're horror stories, but like someone comes in and they go like, oh, I have contamination obsessions. And their therapist goes, okay, we're just going to, touch dirt and then sit there and not wash our hands. Right. And what it turns out is it's like, it has nothing to do with that. The story is about like touching something and then going and touching somebody else and passing some sort of disease to them and feeling responsible for it. So there's a whole bigger, broader story on the second part than just simply, I feel dirty. There's a story related to it, and that's what we're trying to look at. And I'd encourage you, Abby, to start considering if that's related to it, because then you can start to build your hierarchy of situations and thoughts and places and things like that trigger you. And then you can kind of rank those. So you can think about, with this, what are the places you're afraid to have this thought? What are the situations you're afraid to have this thought? Are there ways that it says it or ways that it shows up in mind that you're afraid to have it? Are there things that you're worried about holding or handling or being near that you don't want to have, right? Are there clothes you feel uncomfortable with that are related to that, right? Are there kind of related phrases or ideas or pictures or colors that are related to this? And you can write down all these things and put that into a list and rank those from the like lowest anxiety provoking thing to the hardest. You can also certainly just say, I'm going to tackle this one, and it can be simply out of order. And there's a lot of good reasons for that. But the easiest, most straightforward one is we're going to start with the easiest one and go to the hardest. So we start with the easiest one at the top of the list, and you do that thing. And you do that thing over and over and over again. So let's say I don't want to have this, like one of the examples of this, I can imagine, I don't know where it would land on your hierarchy, but having the thought, kill her, I think that was the phrase, let me go back to it, kill her. All right, kill her around your niece. Okay, so guess what you're going to do? You're going to go hang out with your niece, and you're going to let that thought be there, or you're going to say it, kill her, kill her, kill her, kill her, kill her. You're going to say it like 100 times. And then you're going to come back the next day and you're going to do it again. You're going to come back the next day and you're going to do it again. You see where I'm going with this, right? And maybe once that becomes more comfortable, then you hold her and you say it. And maybe after that, you hold her and say it or think it, while your, brother, sister, whoever is out of the room, right? So maybe you're alone, right? Maybe you're going to say it. You're not going to hold her, but you're going to say it and you have a knife in your pocket. Right? So there's a lot of different scenarios that you can do to help get you closer and closer to this fear. But ultimately, the goal is to do these things without doing compulsive behaviors. So avoidance, neutralizing, reassurance seeking, etc. So again, that's why that part is important. Now, I also want you to consider starting to develop a new relationship with this thought. one reason that we have the feared thoughts that we have is it is our brain pointing out like the worst thing to think of at that time, right? So maybe the worst thing to think of around a very vulnerable new human is kill them. I could see that. I definitely could see that. So maybe that's what your brain is doing, is it's saying, hey, Abby, this would be a terrible, horrible thought. Make sure you don't do this, okay? Thanks. Just looking out for you, buddy. It could be that, right? And it could be related to that in some sort of way. So one way that we can treat this is to treat it as your brain looking out for you, which therefore means there's nothing to do about it other than to say, thanks for looking out for me, brain. I don't like the thought. I don't love the thought, but it is there. So it's going to be there for whatever length it's going to be there. I don't like it, but it's there. So thinking about developing this new perspective on this, and then practicing accepting the thought as if it is simply your brain helping you, and then it can give you that permission, in a sense, to let go. Now, as far as like other exposures you can do with this, and again, I'm not really solid on the idea that maybe exposures are going to be absolutely necessary, but in this case, two other ideas came to mind. Number one, you could sing it. You could sing the phrase "kill her." You could put the words of "kill her" to your favorite song, and you sing that over and over again, right? You could sing it like an opera, like "kill her," however that sounds, and it's going to sound silly at some point, and good. That's kind of that point, is to get to that place where it doesn't feel threatening or dangerous or scary to whatever degree that story is. Again, it goes back to that story. Now, lastly, the one that I was thinking of is you could record the phrase "kill her," and you could have that on loop. Put your headphones in and have that play on loop. Now, the purpose of this isn't necessarily to habituate to that phrase, but is instead to practice a disengagement and acceptance of it. So that phrase is going to be there, so you practice acknowledging that it is there, and then just simply redirecting back to what you're normally doing. Right? You can think about this as, maybe a sound. If you live in an apartment building, you might hear like the place down the way, their smoke alarm constantly goes off. So you kind of get used to the sound of the smoke alarm going off. It's annoying. You know it's there. But over time, because you know that it's useless, it's pointless, you kind of learn to filter that out and you get on with your day. And then you notice it again, and then you kind of go, ugh, Jeff down the way, they suck at cooking. And you get back to your life, right? The idea behind this, again, is to practice disengagement, not treating it as if it's special, not treating it as if it's worth your attention, but as if it's nothing. You've alluded to believing that this phrase "kill her" means nothing. So the goal would be to treat it as if it is, and to accept that reality that you have the kind of brain that plays this loop over and over and over again. Now, again, there's probably a lot that I'm missing, but I threw a bunch of ideas out at you and speculated on a whole bunch of other stuff. But Abby, most importantly, I appreciate you sending this question in, because there's someone else in the world who also has a thought or a concern like this, and hopefully this has helped them as well. So to Abby and to anybody else out there struggling with this, thank you so much for trusting me with this question and for listening. It genuinely means the world that people listen. Oh, and we crossed the 7-year mark. I forget if I mentioned that earlier. We crossed the 7-year mark with this episode. I released this episode just before my daughter just before my daughter was born, and she's about to turn 7. So it's this podcast's anniversary, as it is my daughter's, living anniversary. We call that birthdays. But anyways, I hope everybody else out there is doing well. And again, thank you all so much for listening. Until next time, everybody, take a risk, challenge yourself, and don't take your brain too seriously. Bye. Thank you for listening to the Fearcast. If you would like your question answered on a future episode, please click on the Submit a Question link at fearcastpodcast.com. If you would like your question answered sooner, please send me a recording of your question to questions@fearcastpodcast.com, or by sending me an audio message through Instagram by DMing me at fearcastpodcast on Instagram. If you like the Fearcast, please write a review on your podcast platform of choice. Please remember that the Fearcast is not a substitute for psychotherapy. If you need a little bit of help in your recovery, please go over to fearcastpodcast.com and click on the Find Help link, and there's going to be some information for you there. So until next time, take a risk, challenge yourself, and don't take your brain too seriously. Bye.